very first time you launch RO touch command, it's going to prompt you for a username and password. And this is the same whether it's your first time or you're a returning user to RO touch. So the very first time you log in, the very first password will typically be an admin password. In this instance, my password or my username is admin, and my password should be admin as well, which it is. When you first log into Touch Command, if you are an administrator, you're going to see two tabs. You're going to see a checklist tab and a configuration tab. Today, we're going to really focus heavily on the configuration side because that's where a lot of the ins and outs of how to use RO Writer Touch comes into play. So we're going to click on the configuration side here. And you're going to see that there is a general settings section and a checklist setting here. What I typically will do is when I train a store, I will start from the general settings, work our way all the way down to the bottom, and then I will go into the checklist at the very end. So when we first launch RO Writer Touch, the very first job of the person who's being trained is to know how to set up users. So to set users up, we click on the User tab, and you'll see I have some pre-configured users here already. If you look, here's my admin user, and I have all the permissions across the board for this particular user. I also have some technicians and a service writer. To create a new user, it's the same each and every time. It's clicking on the New User tab. You'll search your employee index for a user, so I'm just going to choose Jerry here. The next thing I'll do is look for a service writer. If Jerry was a service writer, I'd choose Jerry as a service writer. In this case, Jerry's not a service writer, so I will go back to the technician and map him as a technician. So no service writer, Jerry's a technician. Then I'll give Jerry a username. Now the username is not important to whether you use caps or not. It is not case sensitive. However, the passwords are case sensitive. Typically, to keep the things simple, for my users, I will always use the first name as their password as well because I know they can't forget that. So we'll hit Jerry in here, and I just keep it all lowercase just to keep things simple. Now you're noticing I'm not going to click Jerry as an administrator because he's just a technician here. So there's no reason why he needs to come in here and make changes. So what we'll do is we'll click Save Now. We just now added Jerry here within RO Writer Touch, and you can see he's mapped both as an employee and a technician. Now, if you notice, Jerry doesn't have any permissions. By default, this is normal. So we need to come back over to the left-hand side where it says Edit next to Jerry's name and make sure we click Edit. Clicking Edit will allow us to go ahead and add to appropriate permissions for Jerry. So what we're going to do is we're going to give him the access to see work in progress, estimate in progress, time clock, and we're going to limit his tech view. Now, if you want, your technicians can have different permissions than what I'm just showing you here. This is just a typical setup that I do for all stores. Technicians typically aren't writing up new ROs and they're not writing up estimates, and we wouldn't certainly want to give them access to see the store sales, unless if they're a shop foreman and that's pertinent to their job, then maybe you'd want to give them shop pulse so they can see the store sales. Last tab here, which is the Limit Tech View, will only allow the technician to see the work that they are assigned to, which means if they are not assigned to work, they can't assign themselves to it. They also cannot see any of the work that other technicians are performing. They're only able to see what they have assigned to them. Once you have the permission set, you just simply click Update. That locks in those changes. Again, it's not necessary to map a user to the time clock. There's a lot of instances where you'll have a service writer or even a manager that aren't in the system as an employee. They may be in as a service writer, but they're not in as an employee. So in that case, you don't need to have an employee map. Again, it's not necessary to do so. You can also have a user that's just an administrator that monitors the account that's neither a technician nor a service writer. In that case, you would just create them a username and password and give them the permissions to see the items that you want. So again, there's different ways to go about it. Every store is going to be a little bit different. But again, not required to have either an employee, service writer, or even technician. You can create just a username and password, sort of like the admin or the RO Writer Touch user that we create when we first log in. So that's adding and creating new users. Now the second tab down is the data location path. Now this is an area where you'll typically not touch very often, but it's a good idea to know what it does. in case if something should change. This lets me know where my database is located at, and it also tells me what database I'm using. So in this case, my data is located on the C rwriter data folder, and the MDB file I'm looking at is the rwriter.mdb file. Sometimes shops will call their MDB file something different. Maybe it could be the name of the store or even a number, so it's important to know where this is actually looking at. The second one down is the images path. When you take photos or attach checklists, they now become images and move to the rwriter images folder. So you want to make sure that folder is never deleted or removed or cleaned, because then you will lose the checklists or photos that technicians or service writers have taken. The third tab down is the update server. We leave this blank because it already knows the server of the query within the update section for rwriter touch. So we leave that blank unless if we're actually having to manually input information, then we would populate a field in here. Otherwise, that says blank. And then last but not least is the touch URL. The touch URL lets rwriter touch know where the data is at and what machine the server is located on. So in this case, the machine is located at this specific IP address. Now, rwriter touch can be installed on any PC because it's always going to look back to the database and then host the signal. So it doesn't necessarily have to be installed on the server. In this case, rwtouch is installed on this physical server. If the IP address should happen to change for rwriter touch, this area here would need to be updated to reflect the new IP address. Again, when we install rwtouch, we will typically set a static IP unless if the IT department states otherwise. Third tab down allows us to populate an email. Again, I don't have an email configured here. I'm going to teach you guys how to configure an email. So it's very straightforward. It works with multiple email providers. Now, there are some email providers that just do not work very well just simply because it requires specific protocols that this section here can't accommodate. The best email that I find that works really well is Gmail, Yahoo, and some of the Outlook accounts work really well. GoDaddy is also another preferred email client just because it's really easy to set up and they don't require a lot of security like some of these other emails. So to set it up, in this case, we're just going to set up a Gmail. And the SMTP address will always be something similar to this. For Gmail, it'll always be smtp.gmail.com. Then the last portion will be the port. And Gmail will use secure socket, so we'll go ahead and check that off. It does not need to use secure password authentication. Again, a lot of times we can help you set this up if it's a struggle or you need to understand how to do that. The account name will be the email that you're going to be using. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and populate an email. And then we'll go ahead and populate a password. Then the last thing to do is go ahead and put your shop name in. And then a return email address should we need one. We'll typically always choose the one we send, unless if it needs to go to a different email. Some cases, stores are using an email to send and a different one to receive, but in this case, we're going to use the same one to both send and receive. And then the very last one pertaining to accounts will be if you want to send a backup email to another email that you're archiving this information. Now, one of the reasons why you would send this is because it's easy for you to go back and see who got a checklist, who didn't get a checklist, and also you can recall upon any of the images that you may have sent. Now, you can also do that from within rwriter, but this also gives you a second layer of protection should the image folder be deleted at any point. I'm going to go ahead and skip that, and then in the email subject, I'm just going to put your vehicle inspection. And that's what the customer will see when they receive this email. Also, you can include a shop header and a logo. The logo has to be at least 80 pixels large. It can't be any bigger than that. PNGs work really well and JPEGs. GIFs are also available to be used as well. And then you would click use the shop header. So if you want a logo to be a part of the email that you send to customers, you can definitely do that as well. You can also populate your shop information, such as your shop's address, name, phone number, etc. You can put all of that information in here as well. And you can also have it where you send a greeting to the email recipient. So once that's done, you just hit save. That locks in those changes. Now, if I've populated all this information correctly, I should be able to do a test email. Now, I haven't used this email. Now, I haven't set this email up properly to allow secure support, but if you are using a Gmail, you do have to turn on secure connection to allow this email to work. And that's only on Gmail, and that's pretty much just a setting with the email itself. Then it should work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn on secure connection so we can go ahead and test the email so I can show you what it will look like when it does send. And we're just going to keep pressing on while I fix that. The very next tab is interfaces and options. Now this really pertains more so for shops that are using Carfax more than anything, and also Epicor integration. If your shop is not using Epicor integration or Carfax, this is an area that we'll actually turn off when we're going and configuring this. If it's not turned off, it can typically cause an error. So we will ask you whether you are using Carfax or you're using Epicor when we go to configure the shop. Okay, and we're just going to hit done here. Okay. Also in this area, you're also able to allow technicians to punch in on multiple jobs. If you want them to punch in on more than one job, that has to be checked off. By default, we do not keep that enabled, and I'll tell you why. A lot of times technicians will forget to punch in on more than one job or punch out on the job, and they're sitting there flagging hours, and then you have to go back and correct that. So we'll typically leave that unchecked. If you want to use that, we leave that to your discretion to use. Okay, moving on. Next tab down, we have the Goals tab. The Goals tab allows us to configure daily sales goals, and you can see it's showing 2,400 here right now. Now, this is in no way what the shop could be doing. This is just the automatic defaults. You can set this to be anything you want it to be. It does not have to be what we have here. These are not static by any means. You can change this as you see fit. To change it, you just simply populate the amount of ROs that you want. The average RO, we can say the average RO is 200, and then we can say we want to strive for at least $4,000 in daily sales, and we can hit save. Now, when you're looking in our Writer Touch itself, you'll be able to see how that directly interacts with what we have here in our Writer Touch command. The Quick Job section allows us to map up to 20 quick jobs within our Writer Touch. Now, all these quick jobs that we have mapped here can be used within our Writer Touch. Now, if you're reading this, it states that the labor operations with parts kits will not display. That means it will not even give us the option to select or map this if it sees that a parts kit is part of that labor operation. Now, typically, we'll use this for most inspections, brake diagnoses, engine lights, things like that, things that you're going to quickly need to add on the fly for a customer. That would be the reasoning behind adding this within here. Now, if it's something that you're going to add on every single ticket, no matter what, as long as you're writing up the RO with RO Touch, you'll see that there's a feature here called Auto Add. My courtesy check has a check mark here. This allows me to attach this courtesy check to a repair order instantaneously. Every time I write it up, this will automatically hit the RO as long as I write it up with RO Touch. To add a new quick job, it's pretty straightforward. We just choose the category that we want to pull the quick job from. So in this instance, we're just going to come down here, and we're going to choose wheel alignment because that's something that gets asked quite a bit. We're going to choose the wheel alignment. Then we'll choose the operation. So we'll choose the wheel alignment, and we'll hit save. That locks it into our Writer Touch, and if I don't choose a position, it'll just put it right down here at the bottom. So that is quick jobs. Again, you can have up to 20 of them assigned, and you can add or remove these. You don't have to keep them here like this all the time. You can delete the ones that maybe you're not using most commonly. The last tab in the general settings section is called the Update tab. When there is an update available for our Writer Touch, you will come into this section here and just click Check for Update. It'll query our server and tell us what version is available, what version is installed. If there is a version higher available, you will get a button beneath here that will prompt you to install. Now, I get asked all the time, how do I know if there is an update available for RWriter Touch command? Well, typically what will happen is your application will update from the Touch server or from the application store first. So if you're on iOS, which is the Apple product, you'll get an update. And if you're on Google, which is Android, you'll get an update from that server as well. When you try to log back into your application after the update, it will know that the Touch command server is older than the application version, and it will ask you to update Touch command. So if you get that prompt, you'll need to update it. Typically, updates don't come out very, very often. We try to stay within the quarter. So about every 4 months, you may get an update available as they come out. Now, we will be getting another update here before the year's out. I would look for that probably in November. The next section, which is the fun section, is checklists. So typically when we install RWriter Touch for you, we will provide you all with 3 checklists. So you can see here I have a courtesy check, a motor vehicle inspection, and an oil change checklist. Now these are all predefined. We use the same for every single shop that we install. If I click on the courtesy check, you're going to notice we have a specific set of items here. This checklist has 38 items. If I click on the motor vehicle inspection, there's only 1 item. And if I click on the oil change, we have 15 items. Now you can have as many items as you want on a courtesy check. I typically recommend keeping it under 40 because you have to keep in mind a lot of these customers are going to view these checklists either on their phone or some sort of mobile device, and it's going to be a lot of scrolling for them to get through all the checklist items if there's more than 40 on there, especially if you're attaching pictures to these items as well. So the checklist items are all second area here. You can see we have quite a few checklist items, and they're all housed here. Every item that we create says in the checklist area. Every single checklist item that we create also has a condition attached to it. So if I click on the air filter, here's the conditions, and it has inspected and okay, may require attention, needs attention immediately, or not inspected. Now you can move these or remove them or add different conditions as you see fit. It's entirely up to you. It doesn't have to stay static. You can also create additional conditions. Now, we have a limited amount of conditions that we've created. I've had shops create tons more conditions, and you can make it as elaborate as you want. It's entirely up to you. Just make note, when you do create conditions, as you can see I have here, conditions that you want to be highlighted in a color have to have a symbol attached. You'll take note that anything that's not inspected or not applicable is black and does not contain any sort of icon. Now the icons will be either an X or a check mark, or it can even be an exclamation point. Depending on the operating system, you will see the check marks here. I would say test it out as you're building it so you can see what check marks are what. But if I just click edit next to the failed inspection, you can get the idea of what the red X will be. It'll have the little icon above, and your PC may vary, but this is typically what it is for an X. And for the check mark, you'll have the 2 little dots above the U for the check mark. So you have to have a symbol for colors to work properly. You can also change the intensity of the conditions. You can see everything I have here is basically bold except for not applicable and not inspected. When we build checklists, I will always guide a customer to build the checklist in reverse, meaning start with your conditions. Once you have the set amount of conditions that you need, then you can go in and start building checklist items. All of your checklist items will definitely be housed in this hub here. Once you build a checklist item, you will need to add conditions to it. So I'm going to just do this in reverse here. I'm going to build a condition, and I'm just going to call this condition test. I'm going to add a condition to it, and we're going to put the check mark in there. And I'm going to use this text and symbol. I want text and symbol on this. I don't want just the symbol. I want both. And then I'm going to use the green because we are using the check mark, so I want the condition to be in the green. And then I'm also going to make it bold so it stands out. Now I'm not going to add any follow-up. If I add a follow-up, this item will work with the marketing module as well, meaning that it can send an email to the customer. So I'm not going to use any follow-up for this particular item. I'm going to hit save. So now we've successfully created a condition. I'm going to come in here to the checklist items, and I'm going to create a new item. I'm also going to label this one test, and I'm going to hit save. So I've now created a new item. I need to find that item in my list here. Here's the item. I'm going to simply click edit. Scroll back to the bottom here. And update. Scroll back to the bottom here. I'm going to click on conditions, and I'm going to add a condition that I just created. Now I can add more than the condition I just created, but for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to come down here and choose the test item and hit save. So this particular item only has one item in the condition list. Once I add that item marked, I can then go to my checklist. Here's my oil change checklist. I'm going to hit select, and I'm going to add the item that I just created. And I can just scroll through the list of the items that are available. Now, one thing you'll notice is that this checklist has 15 items. It's not showing me every single item that I have available because it's taken out the items that are already existing on the checklist. It will never allow you to duplicate items on the checklist. It will only show you what's already, what's not available and what is available. So it's one of the nice things. You can't duplicate any items. So here's my test item. I'm just going to hit save. Now, if I wanted to add another item to my checklist, you'll notice the test icon is gone. There's a test drive, but the test is gone. So it knows it's already added to that particular checklist. Now, I can have multiple items added to multiple checklists, so I can add that test item to multiple checklists. That's fine, but it's smart enough to know that you've already added it to that specific checklist. Now, how do these checklists get attached to the tickets? Well, they have to be mapped to labor. So you can see I have a lot of checklists mapped to multiple labor operations. So if you're following along at the top here, it says attach a checklist to a labor operation. So I'm going to choose the category, and I'm just going to go here under Other. And I'm just going to choose miscellaneous labor, and I'm going to attach this oil change checklist to this labor line. That means every time this miscellaneous labor line gets added to a ticket, it's going to send this oil change checklist to that ticket. I'm going to hit save. It is now mapped under this. So this labor hits a ticket, the checklist will follow it. That's the way checklists will work. They get assigned by the labor. So if it's not assigned to labor, the checklist will not appear. Just a tip, when you are assigning checklists, you want to make sure that you don't duplicate checklists. You'll notice in my database I have a lot of oil changes that already have checklists attached. But if I add a courtesy check to a ticket that also has an oil change, now I have two checklists attached to my ticket. You want to try to limit to only having one checklist that is really duplicating some of the functions that a technician is already going through. So a courtesy check has all the items that a oil change has and then some. So we wouldn't want to have an oil change checklist and a courtesy check checklist. So you want to make sure you only limit tickets to at least one, unless if you create something different, like an AC inspection or maybe a brake inspection, something different than the normal courtesy check. So that's mapping the labor. The next tab over is the checklist tab. So as these checklists start appearing on the tickets, they will start populating in this checklist area here. So as a service writer, if I had this window open, I'm waiting for these checklists to go green. Now currently there's no notification that's going to tell a checklist, tell a service writer that a checklist is complete and ready. The service writers have to manually check here to see when they are ready to go. As you can see, I have two checklists currently in here, two that are incomplete and one that is complete. So if I click on Jerry Parker's, you'll see that this particular unit is a emissions inspection and it failed the inspection. So if I had the customer's email address, I can easily just populate the email and send the customer that email. So let's go ahead and try to send that email. And it went ahead and sent the email. I did turn on the appropriate security settings within Gmail, so it did send that email to sales@rwriter.com. I can also add additional comments into this checklist if I need to, or I can edit the checklist if maybe the customer decided that they were going to have the work fixed. We can, make the inspection reflect a past inspection, And we can even leave a note for the customer here. We can hit save. So you can see the difference between the two, the boldness. Again, this is the importance between using icons and the text, so that way you can have this boldness, because this will be formatted down to a mobile format if you email a customer and they view it on their mobile device, such as a phone or a tablet. Again, I can also attach an image. If I have an image available on my PC, I can add a selected image to this particular ticket, if that's available. Or I can remove images that are available here as well. Maybe a technician took a photo, we need to remove it. We can do that as well. So you have the final say before you send that email off to the customer. Here's another ticket. Here's an oil change checklist. We'll click on this here. And you can see there's some work done, but not all is complete. So if a technician doesn't fully complete a courtesy check, I can easily come into here and begin modifying the checklist here, along with adding any notes if the technician didn't complete it. Once the courtesy check is 100% complete, we can hit save. And if we click the checklist section again, you'll now notice that that is now green. Now, it's very important that technicians do use statuses, and if you don't have a status that says inspection complete, it may be a good idea to add one, so that way that can also grab the service writer's attention while they're looking over here. Statuses will show up from our writer, and the technicians do have the ability from their tablets to change the status within our writer touch and touch command.